Anti-Redistribution of Wealth by Litzy, Stephanie, Noelle, Anna, Karina, Daniela, Andrea, and Helen. A flat tax is the same rate in which is given to the poor and the rich to pay. At a federal level, the U.S. doesn't use the flat tax rate. A progressive income tax is a system that we use now. It is exactly what it sounds like. The tax rate increases as income increases. In the year 2014, according to the income tax data released by the IRS, the top 1% paid more taxes than the bottom 90%. Additionally, the richest 10% in the U.S. paid about 70% of the income tax. The Americans in the bottom half of the earnings, though, paid just 3% of the income tax. Furthermore, the top 1% of the taxpayers in the U.S. pay more than 7 times higher than those in the bottom 50%, 27% individual income tax rate for the 1% and 3.5% for the bottom 50. In 2015, the top 1% earned 16.5% of income but paid a staggering 43.6% of federal income tax. At the same time, more than 44% of Americans pay no federal income tax at all. Forcing Americans to deal with an unreasonable amount of funding the government is counterproductive. It can kill jobs and lower government revenue. For example, if higher taxes are placed on the wealthy and those that are in control of opening or expanding a business, it is not just the rich who suffer, but the workers who are not hired as well. Then, if economic growth is slowed down due to higher taxes, the government results in taxing a smaller amount of money at a higher rate.
How exactly do you tax the rich? When they feel like this will become a problem, they will immediately reach out to sources and make adjustments. In other words, you can't make the rich pay more taxes without hurting everyone else below them. Therefore, taxing the rich more will make a difference. Adding on to this, raising taxes will not balance the budget. From 1954 to 2009, a pattern is seen. Higher taxes results in less tax revenue. Revenues collected from taxes on income and profits, Social Security, and contributions. Taxes on goods and services, payroll taxes, tax on ownership and transfer of property, and other taxes. The reason this is a problem is because tax revenue are used to fund public services, provide goods for citizens, and pay government officials. Regardless of tax rates, the federal government tax revenue is a constant 80% of GDP.
Raising taxes for the rich affects businesses. Many times when small and medium-sized businesses get a rise in their taxes, it makes them have the need to get a loan since they start struggling economically. This may lead to the fall of business sales. Also, when these businesses have a rise in corporation tax, many business owners pass it on to their consumers. The problem with this is that they will not want to pay more for something they can get somewhere else for less. Having a higher interest rate in these businesses will increase their debt. This leads to having to let their employees go. Since their economic resources have been going down, they will not be able to pay them for their work. When small businesses are hit with higher costs, it affects those with less disposable income. They will see their costs rise to levels they can't afford. Higher taxes are normally treated the same as any other form of increased cost. They will end up paying for it at some time. This makes life harder for the small businesses seeking to survive by keeping costs competitive, but being unable to do so. Higher taxes lead to a reduction in investments that causes there to be less businesses and unemployment increases.
What is capitalism? Capitalism is an economic system characterized by private or corporate ownerships of capital goods, by investments that are determined by private decision and by prices, production and the distribution of goods that are determined by mainly the competition in a free market. Official unemployment currently stands at 7.7%, and there is an estimated 4 million job vacancies, and an average job vacancy remains unfilled for about 23 business days today. So why is it taking so long to fill these job vacancies? It's simple. A management professor at San Francisco State University explained that bosses fear the economy is going down again. According to Marxist.com, with the estimated federal cuts will ultimately lead to the immediate loss of 700,500 jobs, and the Keynesian measure is tax the rich so the poor can use that money. The capitalist system doesn't function to fulfill the needs to employ workers. The primary object is profit.
Tax cuts. Tax cuts are changes to tax laws that effectively reduce the amount of taxes you pay. Tax cuts boost demand by increasing disposable income and by encouraging small businesses to hire and invest more. Tax increases do the reverse. Effects of tax cuts are a decrease in the real income of the government and increase real income of those whose tax rates have been lowered before.
New York City taxes. New York City sales tax rate is 4.5% and the use tax is 4%. The Metropolitan Commuter Transportation District subcharge of 0.375% of a total sales and use tax of a 8.875%, according to the New York City Department of Finance. The 24th Annual National Mover Study showed that 61.5% of New York movers left the states, also with just 38.5% of people moving in. The people that left, 41 of them earned approximately $150,000 or higher, and just 8.4% of them earned less than $50,000. From 2010 to mid-2017, the state had a net out migration of over 1 million people.
If the government collects the taxes, then how can we be sure that they are the ones who distribute the money to the poor? The government already spends much of the money they collect, so if taxes increase, then the government will have more money to waste instead of actually distributing it to the people with low income. In 2017, the federal government spent $4 trillion, which is 21% of the nation's GDP, which can explain why we are in debt. The U.S. Treasury already divides all federal spending into 3 groups: mandatory spending, discretional spending, and interest on debt. Mandatory spending and discretional account for more than 90% of all federal spending and pay for all the government services and programs in which we rely on. Interest on debt is the interest the government pays on accumulated debt and is a much smaller amount than the other 2 categories. Mandatory spending mostly spends on Social Security and Medicare, while discretional spending mostly spends on the military. So most of our budget goes towards Social Security, defense, and major health programs. And final, the government does not directly distribute money to the poor, except for food stamps. The major problem we face is that much of the money received by taxes is already being spent by the government.
Creator of values. The noble are the superior ones, the strong ones in the aristocratic society, and in this case, the rich. The noble honor what they recognize in themselves. So the rich, they will help the poor, but under their circumstances. The rich will not help the poor out of pity, but because they can with the power and wealth they have. The noble have power over themselves. So this means the government should not force people who are considered rich to give more of their money to the poor. The rich should help the poor through donation, not obligation. Will to the power. In a healthy aristocratic society, there are the strong and the weak. Will to the power is the will to life, because without exploitation in an aristocratic society, there cannot be development in the society. The strong are the rich and the weak are the poor. So the rich should not be forced to give part of their money to the poor through the government. The rich would be giving more of their money to the common people, who are believed to be untruthful to aristocrats.